Thank you for attending Pathways into Drug Court, Stakeholder Perspectives on Race, Admission, and Engagement. The Drug Court webinar series is hosted by The Ohio State University Moritz College of Law Drug Enforcement and Policy Center, The Ohio State University John Glenn College of Public Affairs, and Cornell University Brooks School of Public Policy Department of Sociology. Before we begin, we have just a few notes we'd like to share with you. First, we want to draw your attention to the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom window. The chat is disabled, but you may submit questions at any time. Please note, however, that there is limited time available for Q&A during the webinar. Second, automatic closed captioning has been enabled for the event. To change how you view the transcription or to hide it, click Show Caption in the menu at the bottom of your Zoom window. Finally, this event is being recorded. The recording will be made available on our YouTube channel as soon as possible following the event. A link will be shared with all registrants via email as soon as it is available. Follow us at OSU Law DEPC to stay up to date on our research, programming, and future events. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the discussion. Dr. Tassone?
Thank you. Hello, and welcome to today's Drug Court webinar. Thank you to everyone for registering for this webinar session. My name is Dr. Crystal Tassone, and I am a researcher at the Ohio Colleges of Medicine Government Resource Center at The Ohio State University. My background is in criminal justice and behavioral health evaluation methodology and statistics. I am pleased to serve as moderator for the first webinar in this June webinar series. This webinar series presents findings from research on drug courts in Ohio, with particular attention to access to drug court programs. The first webinar presents results from interviews with stakeholders who work in drug court and shares their perspectives on access to drug court. We will begin by presenting these study findings, followed by a question and answer session. To start, the study introduction will be presented by Lydia Applin. Lydia is a third-year PhD candidate at the John Glenn College of Public Affairs at The Ohio State University. She's interested in researching criminal justice policy and public services, including policing and juvenile justice. Results will then be presented by Dr. Tasha Purdue. Dr. Purdue is an assistant professor at The Ohio State University's John Glenn College of Public Affairs and affiliated faculty in the Drug Enforcement and Policy Center. Her research focuses on substance use, service systems, and policy responses, using mixed methods to inform evidence-based interventions that improve outcomes for individuals, families, and communities. She currently serves as MPI on NIJ-funded research examining overdose response and system-level approaches to supporting families. The conclusion will be presented by Aditi Munshi. Aditi is a PhD candidate at the College of Social Work at The Ohio State University. She uses critical interpretive methods to examine how young people navigate legal systems and the consequences of carceral contact. She works across system scales to identify pathways towards more equitable outcomes for justice-involved youth. At the conclusion, I will lead with a few questions to start the Q&A, and then we can turn it over to the audience for any other questions.
Hello, and thank you again for joining us for this first webinar in our drug court series titled Pathways into Drug Court, Stakeholder Perspectives on Race, Admission, and Engagement. Again, my name is Lydia Applin, and I'm here with Dr. Tasha Purdue and Aditi Munshi to present these insights. So today we'll be sharing qualitative findings from our study, which examines how differences in drug court access emerge in practice and what drug courts can do to strengthen this access. While we identify key factors that contribute to differences in access, this presentation will largely focus on solutions, specifically strategies from across multiple areas of the system to improve access to drug court programs. The findings that we're presenting today are from a project that was supported by an award from the National Institute of Justice, the Office of Justice Programs through the Ohio Department of Justice. The opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this webinar are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. The project team consisted of 3 principal investigators, including Dr. Tasha Purdue, along with Dr. Sade Lindsay and Dr. Alex Fraga. Dr. Purdue led phase 3 of the study, which is the phase that we'll be presenting today. So, to provide a bit of background that motivated the study, existing research has demonstrated that drug courts are effective. For example, studies show that drug courts are highly effective at reducing recidivism and substance use, increasing employment and income, and improving family relationships as well. However, there's been limited research that looks at drug court access. Most research on drug courts has focused on outcomes such as graduation and recidivism. And further, among studies that have explored access to drug courts, there remains a lack of qualitative insight, as nearly all existing research has used solely quantitative or numerical data. Therefore, we were interested in understanding pathways into drug court and the factors that ultimately shape access to participating in drug court programs. So the purpose of this study was then to explore access to Ohio drug courts, with particular attention to differences in access according to race. So phase one of the study first examined how adding specialized dockets in Franklin County shifted probation and jail sentencing for substance use cases. And this phase also assessed how these changes in sentencing varied by race and sex subgroups. Phase two then analyzed differences in sentencing by race. And in particular, this phase assessed how differences in sentencing impacted people's drug court eligibility. Phase three, which is the focus of today's webinar, explored how drug court team members describe differences in drug court access. And during this phase, we asked team members about the mechanisms and factors that contribute to differences in access, along with proposed strategies for addressing this. And these are the findings that we'll be presenting here today. So in conducting this research, we visited 22 courts across 18 counties in Ohio, culminating in 73 hours of court and team meeting observations. The map on the left here shows all the counties that we visited across the state. We also interviewed 52 stakeholders who work in drug courts in different capacities, including judges, coordinators, probation officers, case managers, treatment providers, and attorneys. Interviews discussed a range of topics, including stakeholders' experience working on a drug court team, their program structure, use of harm reduction, treatment, and the policy context, as well as their perspectives on access to drug court. We did not interview stakeholders from every single county that we visited. Some courts participated in observations and interviews, while others just participated in observations. We then compared similarities or differences across what interviewees shared, and we compiled these findings in this presentation that we're sharing here today. So the remainder of this presentation will break down these findings and discuss solutions to differences in drug court access. I will now turn it over to Dr. Tasha Purdue to share these results.
Thanks, Lydia. And before walking through the specific findings, I want to step back and highlight one key insight that came through very clearly across interviews. As we reviewed and compared what stakeholders share, we found that differences in court access are not the result of a single decision point. Instead, they emerge through a series of decisions and interactions across the system over time. As such, we consider access more broadly as the full pathway into and through drug court, including whether someone is identified as a potential candidate, whether they are referred, whether they are admitted, and whether they are able to engage in and participate in the program. What's important here is that participants identify that these differences are not created in just one place. They are cumulative. They build across multiple actors, systems, and stages of the process. And this matters for practice because it changes how we think about solutions. If differences emerge across the system, then strategies to address them also need to operate across the system. So no single change, whether it's a tool, a policy, or training, will address the issue on its own. So with that in mind, we've organized the findings into two parts. First, we'll walk through where these differences emerge based on what stakeholders identified across the system. Then second, we'll walk through practical strategies stakeholders suggested to strengthen access. This structure helps us move from understanding where gaps occur to identifying what can be done about them. So with this study, we were seeking to answer an important question: what shapes who gets access to drug court and who doesn't? To organize these findings, we grouped them into 5 categories that reflect where in the system these influences occur. And we've mapped these across structural, organizational, individual, intervention, and process level categories. And these reflect everything from conditions outside the court to day-to-day decisions about referrals and participation. So what we'll do next is walk through each category and highlight what stakeholders identified as the most important factors. So we'll start with structural factors. These are conditions outside the drug court itself. And these are critical because they determine who enters the system in the first place and therefore who is even eligible for drug court.
So participants noted and emphasized that enforcement patterns shape who has contact with the justice system. For example, they noted different approaches to substance use over time and differences in how certain offenses are charged. As one judge explained and noted the difference between when the substance of choice was crack cocaine and the strong enforcement model, then as heroin and synthetic opioids came, the enforcement model changed, and they saw and noted a difference in participants. This highlights that access to diversion programs like drug court is partially determined before the court is even involved. Related to this, participants also described how responses vary to different drug crises. For example, some periods emphasized enforcement and others have emphasized treatment. And these shifts influence who is identified as needing services and how systems respond. And it affects who gets routed towards treatment versus traditional criminal processing. The local population and geography was also noted, so the local demographics matter. And some counties noted that they have limited diversity within the county itself, and others do see more variation. And this often reflects the urban versus rural context here in the state. So this can also have an influence on who enters the system more broadly and what the pool of eligible participants looks like. And then access to treatment services. So even when individuals are eligible, access depends on the availability of services. So stakeholders describe some limitations in access to certain services, such as interpreter services, highlighted the need for culturally responsive programming, and noted that treatment center location can also be prohibitive if it's located far from participants or potentially in areas where participants might feel uncomfortable residing in. So even when a referral might happen, participation may not be accepted due to these factors. And then the broader community awareness and perception. So stakeholders emphasized the impact of awareness among communities on related to treatment itself, as well as stigma towards treatment and how this can drive participation in programs. So this reflects how perceptions of substance use and the beliefs about treatment can influence whether individuals recognize a need or engage with services. So in some contexts, engaging with treatment, a participant noted, could be seen as a betrayal of the community or of the family itself. So this may influence how individuals perceive and whether they want to engage in treatment. So these structural factors shape who enters the system, who is identified, and what options are possible before the court even becomes involved. Next, organizational factors. These refer to how the drug court operates internally. And these are important because they determine how policies are applied in practice. And a major theme that emerged was limitations in the use of data. And stakeholders often described relying on more observations or general impressions as to their demographics, and this rather than more systematic tracking. And as this quote highlights, it was noted that they perceive that they do a terrible job of harvesting and analyzing the data. And without this data, courts may not know who is being referred, who is not, and where these gaps may exist. There was also variation among courts in discussing potential barriers and willingness to examine potential processes within the court or the system. And some courts reported actively discussing and engaging in this. There were some courts had engaged with other community partners, other tools, other trainings, while others have avoided or may not be engaging in these conversations altogether. Related to that, there was mixed experiences with training. So in some courts, there was more training, mention of training, and noted increased awareness among the participants. In others, there was less engagement in training, and that could be training within the court system itself. And in some instances, this was more mandated training within the court, or just training in general. So more engagement in conferences, for example. So this influences how decisions are made and awareness and what initiatives are active in the court. And then some discretion in decisions. So even when criteria exist, their stakeholders did describe that there could be some discretion applied. So in interpreting criminal history, assessing program fit, and evaluating risk. So access could vary depending on those individual decision makers or the team or across courts. And then finally, team composition and representation. So stakeholders emphasized representation can vary the importance of lived experience and having a diversity of perspectives within the court. So these factors were noted as influencing communication, trust, and engagement with participants. So these organizational factors shape how consistently the programs are implemented, what that looks like, and how decision-making occurs within the court. The individual level factors included both the treatment team members as well as participants. So these factors shape how decisions are made and whether individuals engage with the program. So awareness of the program varied, and participants talked that everyone in the system may not be equally familiar with drug court, with treatment court. So this can include referral sources such as attorneys, prosecutors, judges, probation officers, as well as the participants themselves. So if individuals are not aware of the option, then they're not aware to refer individuals, and individuals are not able to access drug court as an option. The trust in the system. Stakeholders emphasize that trust matters, and for individual participants, this trust may vary, and this can vary depending on their prior experiences with the court itself. So it was noted, and participants commented that it can be difficult for participants to move from seeing the judge as a punitive figure to seeing them as someone as a member of a treatment team. They may also interact with individuals in other settings. So for instance, in jail settings, if these individuals have had more negative perceptions of the court, then this can influence their willingness or trust in the court to engage. So one participant noted that if individuals have limited trust, engaging with a program that requires frequent court interaction may feel less accessible or less appealing to them. And then there was variation in beliefs about substance use and treatment. So whether individuals would view substance use as a problem, their perspectives and views on treatment, how that is, whether it's viewed positively. And this was noted as varying potentially across different demographics. So this participant noted that they perceive that men are less likely to ask for help, and especially minority men. It's looked down upon, and that they may not necessarily want to volunteer for a program. So these beliefs influence the participant interest in engaging in the program. And then the provider perceptions and decision making. So the perceptions of the court can vary across stakeholders, and the perceptions of potential motivation, readiness, or fit can involve interpretation, and that can influence who is referred, encouraged, and accepted. So individual factors shape how opportunities are offered, how they are perceived, and whether individuals engage. For intervention characteristics, these refer to how the program itself is designed, and these directly shape access, participation, and completion. So eligibility criteria was noted, and programs often include exclusions based on offense type or criminal history. So it was noted potentially excluding individuals with a history of violent offenses, gang affiliation or activity, and individuals that were engaged in selling. So stakeholders noted that these eligibility requirements are sometimes influenced by funding and policy constraints. So this individual highlighted that when they were getting federal grant money, they did have to exclude violent offenses, but since then they've been able to make some adjustments within their program. The screening and assessment tools were also noted, and these are used across the courts. Courts vary in the types of assessments and tools that they use, and stakeholders noted that these tools may have some limitations and that they may focus on specific domains or may rely more heavily on past system involvement. So this may not fully capture current needs or environmental factors. And then the program requirements itself. So the drug court programs can be intensive. So they can include frequent court appearances, treatment participation and supervision requirements, and stakeholders describe these as highly effective, but they can be resource intensive for individuals who are also managing work, transportation, and care responsibilities. So these requirements may be difficult to meet. One participant also noted that it can be difficult for example, for individuals who have dual caretaking responsibilities. So for those who are caring for children as well as providing elder care, that it just can kind of exacerbate these difficulties or barriers. So the program design determines who qualifies and who can realistically participate and succeed. And then the process level factors. So these focus on how individuals move into the program. That includes identification, referral, and enrollment. And who identifies participants often depends on it varied across the court. So identification would often depend on other court system actors such as judges, attorneys, and probation officers. And if these individuals are not aware of the program or they do not prioritize drug court, then individuals may not be identified or referred into the program. And there were variability in referral practices. So stakeholders varied in who is able to make the referral, how referrals happen. And some systems had more limited referral pathways, which can restrict access. Associated with that, they noted stakeholder awareness and buy-in can also vary. So not all system actors view drug court the same way. So in this quote, it was noted that some prosecutors don't believe in drug court. The thought is if you do the crime, you do the time. And these perspectives influence whether referrals are made and how options are presented. I do also want to note that some participants also noted that defense attorneys may hesitate to recommend programs to individuals or to their clients because they may have the perception that this just extends or prolongs their contact with the justice system. So they may encourage a more short-term solution versus thinking of the longer-term benefits of enrolling in the program. And then the monitoring and feedback. So few courts reported tracking of the referral patterns and participation trends. So that can limit the ability to identify gaps or make adjustments. So the process factors determine whether eligible individuals are actually identified and referred. So across these 5 areas, we see that differences in access are shaped at multiple points in the system. And what's important is that these factors interact with each other, accumulate over time, and influence both entry and engagement. So the question becomes, where do we intervene? And the answer from stakeholders was clear. There is no single strategy, and improving access requires coordinated adjustments across multiple points in the system, from outreach to referral practices to program design. In the next section, we'll walk through the strategies stakeholders identified to strengthen access, again, across these same 5 categories. Structural strategies focus on improving how individuals connect to the system and understand available options. And these are especially important because they influence access before someone reaches the court. Stakeholders consistently emphasize the need to bring information into the community rather than expecting people to find it. And this includes reaching out, speaking out at community events, engaging with schools, reentry programs, and local organizations, and simply being present in spaces where people already gather. So this participant noted that the need to go out into the community more, talk at churches, schools, community events. So the key issue here is that awareness is uneven. And this committed outreach helps to reduce that gap. And it was important that they noted that it's not something that only the solely on the court responsibility to do, but also the need for treatment providers to also engage in this proactive outreach to communities to make sure communities are aware of treatment to help normalize treatment and to increase this awareness of treatment within the community. Associated with that, participants highlighted the benefit of partnering with trusted community organizations. And they noted who delivers the message matters just as much as the message itself. So stakeholders highlighted partnerships with faith-based organizations, community groups, and local leaders. And these organizations often have established trust and credibility, which can make individuals more receptive to information about treatment and court programs. Another barrier identified was how treatment is perceived more broadly in the community. So stakeholders emphasized reframing treatment as practical supports, a tool for stability and pathway to rebuilding. So for example, a provider noted treatment is giving you tools and not that you're weak. So reframing the thinking that it's a sign of weakness to seek support for substance use or even mental health treatment, but rather that treatment is here to provide you with tools. And this kind of messaging helps address misconceptions, stigma, and reluctance to engage. Stakeholders also pointed to system level gaps in services, including the limited limited access for language interpretation, transportation, barriers, and the need for culturally relevant programming. So even when individuals are eligible for court, they may not participate without access to these services that support them and the program requirements. So the structural strategies really focus on ensuring that people are aware of the program, services are reachable and usable, and the entry point into the system is not limited by information gaps or access barriers. The organizational level strategies focus on what happens inside the court and how decisions are made and how the program operates. And these were some of the most actionable changes for practitioners. And consistent theme was the need to move from informal observations to routine structured data use. And stakeholders emphasized tracking who is referred, who is admitted, who completes the program, because without this, it is difficult to identify gaps, monitor progress, or evaluate changes. So data creates visibility, and visibility can drive improvement. And it was also important to note that participants talked about not just gathering the data, but also having comparisons. So some participants reflected on comparing their participant demographics to the broader county demographics to kind of identify what their court composition looked like. Others noted that it's better to look more at the court system itself specifically and to compare their drug court participants, those demographics, to general probation. So they felt that could provide an understanding of how their court, what their that court looks like as far as demographics in comparison to who is entering into the court system. And even the importance, if this data is being gathered, making sure that that transparency is there. So even when data exists, it was noted that sometimes it's not always shared across the team more broadly. So stakeholders suggested regularly reviewing the participant demographics, sharing updates with the full team, and using this data to guide discussions within the team. So one participant noted that information is power, and it would help make them more aware of what's happening. And they noted that they perceived that doing this on a yearly basis is not frequent enough. So they jokingly said weekly, but they realized that just due to constraints that might be difficult. So but just engaging in this assessment on a more frequent basis and not waiting to do this on a yearly basis. So this would just help support more informed and consistent decision making across team members. Then enhance training, and this can also have an impact on team communication. So stakeholders described the variability and comfort discussing, potential barriers, the awareness of the barriers. So training was noted, and especially the one participant that noted engaging in a state training as a team. They were all able to go, and they all came back with buy-in for working together and it helped them to develop a shared language, consistent expectations, and improved coordination. And then assessing the team composition and membership, and mentorship within the team. So stakeholders emphasize the value of really looking and ensuring a diverse staff, in looking and including peer mentors, as well as individuals with lived experience on the treatment team. And these can help improve communication, engagement, and building that rapport and participant comfort. And then addressing the logistical barriers that may occur. So again, a major theme across interviews was the impact of transportation, childcare, and work schedules. So stakeholders emphasize that participation does require time and resources. So some courts have addressed these barriers through things such as scheduling flexibility or support. So some courts have accommodated individuals when needed with virtual check-ins, or they allow participants to bring children into when they're attending the team meeting. So this can help improve engagement. So these organizational strategies really focus on improving that consistency, awareness, and that capacity to respond to individuals. The individual level strategies focus on the role of decision makers and participant engagement. And these strategies address how people in the system interpret and act on opportunities. So it was noted the need to increase awareness among other individuals in the court. So again, judges, attorneys, prosecutors, probation officers, and that this access depends heavily on whether these other stakeholders recognize or understand eligibility for the court and whether they actively present this as an option. So making sure, and this one individual highlighted, making sure defense attorneys are aware that this is an option and who should I recommend. So what eligibility looks like. And this reflects a key point. Even when eligibility exists, access depends on whether someone raises the opportunity. And related to that, participants highlighted ways to expand this education and exposure to the program. So stakeholders suggested holding trainings for these other individuals within the court system, providing presentations at professional meetings, such as the Bar Association, and even providing mock orientation. So having if an interested individual do a mock drug court orientation for them, have them walk them through assessments, have them come in and sit in on a court session. So these can help individuals better understand the program requirements, what referral looks like, what eligibility looks like, and how to communicate options effectively to participants. And then this can also help standardize how the program is explained. So in some cases, can be framed as an opportunity. In others, it is framed as more work or a longer process. So this can have an impact on participant decisions. So clear, consistent messaging helps ensure that individuals understand expectations and can make informed choices. And then it's strengthening that participant engagement and trust. And participation is not just about eligibility, it's about participants actually joining the program. So stakeholders emphasize taking time to explain the program, building rapport, and having clear materials for individuals. And this is especially important for individuals who may be unfamiliar with the program, be uncertain about committing, or have had prior negative experiences. So these individual strategies focus on improving how the decisions are made and how individuals are informed, encouraged, and supported. So the intervention level strategies focus on how the program is structured and whether it fits participant needs. And the screening and assessment tools were noted, and they noted that the current tools may emphasize criminal history or could also miss important contextual factors. So to address this, courts have started, they suggest, and some courts have started implementing other tools alongside these risk assessments, including the holistic assessments that incorporate factors and other factors such as housing, mental health, and other environmental factors for participants. The assessing and looking at eligibility criteria. So stakeholders just described in some areas removing or revising exclusions that limited access. And this participant noted, for example, prior, if you thought they were in a gang, they were out. Now they don't even ask it anymore. So this reflects a shift towards looking more for program fit and considering and still making individual considerations related to safety, but looking at more on the individual level rather than falling into rigid categories. And then some suggested maybe, is there an option for alternative or lower intensity tracks? So some participants may find it difficult to meet the demands of the full program. So some stakeholders suggested potentially shorter tracks, reduced frequency requirements, or flexible participation models to allow programs to reach individuals who do really need the support, but they may not be able to meet the full program demands. And then flexibility and treatment matching. So stakeholders emphasize that fit really matters for when considering treatment and really making sure to provide options that can improve engagement, retention, and outcomes. So really looking at and making these decisions on matching participants to providers, providing participants with options and allowing adjustments when needed. So for example, some participants may be more comfortable with a larger treatment system. Some participants may prefer a smaller agency. So really looking at those sort of preferences. So the program design plays a critical role in determining who can participate and who can successfully complete the program. And then finally, process strategies focus on how individuals are identified, referred, and brought into the program. And participants noted and described moving beyond having only single source referrals. So this participant noted that they can take referrals from pretty much anyone, and as a result, they started seeing more diversity within their participants. So expanding referral sources can increase opportunities for identification and reduces reliance on a single entry point into the program. And other participants are engaging in more proactive identification as well. So rather than relying only on referrals, some programs actively review cases and they actively identify potential candidates. One participant noted that they would look at the case note and they would assume that certain individuals would be referred, but they weren't seeing them, weren't seeing the referrals come in. So now they have started actively looking to identify individuals who may fit in the program. So this helps ensure that eligible individuals are not being overlooked. And then improving the program visibility. So stakeholders emphasize simple but effective strategies, such as flyers, courtroom materials, or even information in probation packets. So this can ensure that individuals can visibly see the option, they know to ask about the option, and this can help them consider participation. And the use of participant feedback. So really taking the time to learn directly from participants and to learn what's working well in the process and what's maybe not working quite as well. And some areas mentioned exit interviews, listening sessions, and this can help programs understand why people may be declining, what barriers may exist, how referral is working, and what changes may improve access. And then finally, allowing participants to observe the process. So allow them to observe court sessions, attend orientations, and help to reduce fear, uncertainty, or misunderstandings that may be there, and help to lead to more informed decisions about participation. So the process strategies ensure that eligible individuals are identified, opportunities are consistently offered, and access is not limited by gaps in referral pathways. So across these strategies, what we see is that improving access is really about strengthening alignment across the system, from how people are identified, to how programs are designed, to how opportunities are communicated. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Aditi, who will walk through the limitations, implications, and next steps for this work.
Thank you. So, like all research, this study is also not without limitations. One important limitation is that we do not yet have direct perspectives from drug court participants themselves, and we are also missing inputs from some other stakeholder groups. In order to address this, we are planning to expand the study to include interviews with participants and additional stakeholders. This will help provide a more complete understanding of how these processes operate in practice. We are also planning to conduct a systematic stakeholder consensus study to further refine and prioritize the strategies that we have shared today, with the goal of developing a more streamlined and actionable set of stakeholder-driven recommendations. One of the most important takeaway from this work is that differences in access don't emerge at a single point, rather they build across systems. Stakeholders consistently described a series of decision points, from identification to referral to participation, where even a small variation can accumulate over time and shape who ultimately enters the drug courts. This means that access is not just about eligibility, it is about how processes function in practice across multiple stages. And importantly, this isn't about any one role or decision, it is about how the system operates as a whole. And the takeaway for practice is that there are multiple opportunities within the existing structures to strengthen consistency, improve communication, and expand access in ways which align with the program goals. Stakeholders were clear that many of these strategies are not theoretical. They are already being used in some settings and can be implemented in practical and feasible ways. So while the issue is complex, the path forward is actionable, focusing on how everyday processes are carried out across systems can make a meaningful difference over time. As we wrap up this study, we are currently in the process of compiling a report for the National Institute of Justice. In addition to that, we are also preparing brief tailored reports for each participating court that summarizes the findings within their specific local context. We are also developing a series of topical briefs that highlight key findings across areas such as drug market trends, treatment trends, and challenges and innovative approaches to working in drug court settings. We look forward to sharing these reports with you soon and to continuing the conversation. As we conclude, we would like to start by thanking all study participants who generously shared their time and experiences with us. Across court observations, stakeholder interviews, participants spent more than 120 hours helping us better understand how access to drug court works in practice. This study would not have been possible without the engagement and partnership of these court teams. We are also grateful for participants' willingness to share honest perspectives, not just about the challenges, but also about the impact that drug courts have in supporting individuals, families, and communities. As one case manager spoke about the deep commitment many professionals bring to this work, the belief that these programs can create meaningful and, in some cases, life changing opportunities for the participants. We are grateful to have been able to learn from these perspectives and to share them with you today. Here's a list of resources referenced in the presentation today. And thank you again, and we look forward to continuing the conversation and to hearing your questions. Please use this QR code or the link in the chat to complete the feedback form. We are interested in hearing about the topics that you are most interested in. And with that, I will turn it back over to our moderator, Crystal.
Thank you to the presenters. What we just heard provides key perspectives from stakeholders and how access to drug court is shaped, not by a single decision, but across multiple points in the system. A few key themes stand out. First, access is influenced before individuals ever reach the court through broader system conditions and how people enter the justice system. Second, within courts, organizational practices, program design, and day-to-day decision-making all shape how eligibility and participation work in practice. And third, referral pathways are critical. Who identifies someone, how the program is presented, and whether that opportunity is consistently offered. What's especially important is that these factors don't operate in isolation. They build across stages, meaning small differences at each point can have a cumulative impact. On the strategy side, we also heard that there is no single strategy, but there are many practical, actionable steps that programs can take, particularly around referral processes, communication, data use, and program flexibility. Overall, the takeaway is that improving access is really about strengthening how the system functions as a whole, rather than focusing on any one piece in isolation. I'd love to start by turning back to the research team. From your perspective, what was the most important takeaway from this study for practitioners working in drug courts?
Great, thanks, Crystal. I'll take this first. So I think what we heard consistently from stakeholders is that some of the decisions that, who is being referred, who engages and completes the program may be happening without, this systematic tracking. So, and using data to help guide these decisions. So one of the most practical opportunities is simply increasing visibility within the court. So making sure individuals are aware that the court, what the court is, what the court does, making sure both stakeholders working in the court, so judges, probation officers, attorneys, all are aware of the court and how to make those referrals, as well as participants. So having those materials available for participants. So, and then also using this and having systematic collection and tracking of data. So having an understanding of who is being referred, and also those referral sources. So what do the referrals look like from each referral sources? Are there any gaps among the referral sources? Who is being admitted and who is engaging and completing the program? And really tracking these patterns over time can help identify, are there any gaps that may exist and where processes may not potentially be working as intended. So, and I think this isn't about adding a heavy burden. It's using data as a tool to support what teams are already doing. And even the small, consistent tracking and reporting back and having and engaging in discussions among teams can help improve and strengthen decision making and improve outcomes. So I think the key takeaway is that data doesn't just measure performance, it helps make the system more visible, and that visibility can create opportunities for individuals. Lydia or Aditi, I'll turn over to you.
Yeah, I think one thing that I noticed is that every program we visited, or people we interviewed from all the different programs, they were all really different. There was a lot of variation in how different programs were structured and how they were responding to sort of their local community and their community's needs. I think that was really striking to us. Every court we visited really was very different and unique, and that was really interesting to see. And I think also a lot of the stakeholders we talked to were really interested in trying new things or engaging in different innovative practices. People seemed really willing to hear about the work that was going on in other courts and sort of how they could adapt different strategies. So I think that was really, really encouraging just to see how excited so many of the stakeholders were about the work that they do and just how interested they were in trying new things or, yeah, adapting different practices in their local context.
I think for me, we shared that we had participation from 22 drug courts. Participants spent over 120 hours, more than 120 hours, talking to us, interviewing or observations, helping us through the observations. And I think this willingness of the courts to participate in the study speaks to their buy-in and commitment to understanding the practices and also to improving them.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we can open this to the audience Q&A as well, if anybody has any questions.
I think while if there's any questions that folks may have while we look for those, I think something that also I wanted to highlight is what was encouraging about many of these strategies that were identified is that these are relatively low cost, can be low cost, low burden efforts. So, for example, looking to expand referral sources, may not need or require new funding. So that includes, the time to reach out to individuals to provide any training or resources, but that is a relatively low lift. Improving how information is shared with participants. So that can simply be just a change, maybe a more in-depth training for individuals who are serving as those referral sources. Adding simple tracking of referrals can also start with just basic data. So what courts may already be collecting, but really building on that and seeing how they can apply this to their court and really not just collect data to collect it, but then actively use the data to drive decision making within the court. So some of the changes would require resources and they do require time. So again, community outreach is not necessarily uh, super resource intensive, but it is a time intensive thing. And I think it does take time to really build that trust and rapport. So it's not just, one-time event, attending a one-time event will not is not sufficient. So this is, it's consistent community and active community engagement. So but many really just start with adjustments to existing processes rather than starting entirely new programs.
Okay, thank you. I think we have some directions in the chat if anybody is interested in entering any questions. If you cannot see the Q&A button, click on the More button, which will then give you an option to click on Q&A. Okay, we have a question. So, certified courts are required to report data monthly to the Supreme Court of Ohio, and this is as part of their certification standards. Did any of the courts mention if this process could be improved or if the data they're reporting is useful?
Yeah, so courts did mention that, they may collect and report data to the Supreme Court, but that may be where it stops. So I think I think maybe having guidelines in place or in some maybe some were unsure of how to keep this data or how to track it. So I think having systems in place could be helpful. Some mentioned maybe using Excel sheets to track. I think finding a system, and this may vary just depending on local areas too, what may be the most effective way to kind of track and monitor this. But I think having some additional guidance could be helpful and really how to use this data to drive decisions within the court. So I think those were key areas. One participant noted it could be beneficial to form partnerships with other local universities to help in sort of managing some of this, setting some of the infrastructure up for this data management. Because one thing that was apparent is individuals working in the courts wear a lot of hats. So this may be, this is a sort of a low cost thing to do, but it is time intensive and there is effort, and individuals already have a lot of different roles that they're playing within the court and within treatment courts. So I think, any ways that we can minimize that sort of burden on individuals. And then Lydia or Didi, anything else to add related to data?
I think you've covered it well.
Thank you so much for that response, Tasha. I do have another question as well. So my next question is, how might drug courts address race limitations within the system?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly if they're talking about limitations within. So I think these strategies are kind of would address, I think they could be address access more broadly. So I think really focusing and making sure that, some of the suggestions and things that have been implemented are to increase participation among racial and ethnic groups. So I think looking at the eligibility criteria was noted and noting that that focus on past criminal history may exclude certain communities, certain individuals. So looking at these sort of factors within the sort of organization, the actual intervention itself, so the drug court processes, making those changes, addressing on the community level, really increasing that awareness and having those concerted efforts to address and to help minimize stigma. And noted that this can vary depending on cultural perspectives and attitudes towards stigma. Looking at treatment options. So again, making sure that there's culturally responsive treatment, that we have options that individuals are engaging in. It was noted some individuals may not be comfortable residing in certain areas. So just making sure that these treatment options are where individuals will feel that they can actively participate and engage. So I think these strategies really included and were really focused on, access broadly, but I think some of these solutions can specifically address some of those limitations.
Thank you. I'm going to go to another question here, a great one about treatment. Did the type of treatment offered affect who accessed the court programs, such as MAT, methadone, et cetera? Openness to continuing support for folks who relapse. So really, did courts report the type of treatment as a part of the admission process?
So courts highlighted that individuals it was noted across courts, their options. So courts are receptive. We asked about, MOUD treatment, and courts, say that it's up to the treatment. So it's sort of a decision that individuals make with the treatment providers. So what treatment is going to be most effective to them, or most effective, and it's something that they engage in on the treatment side. So the court seemed to indicate that they don't dictate those sort of conditions or those sort of features for individuals, but it's up for more broadly. And this can be there can be limitations if depending on the location area, the treatment providers that are accessible. Some areas have more access to treatment. There's just more availability of treatment. Some have more limitations to treatment. So, and within the court, I think just making sure that their individuals are aware of the treatment options and that they can actively choose a treatment option that works for them.
Yeah, I also think that that was something that a lot of stakeholders described as being sort of enticing to participants is the idea that the court is really going to help connect you to these treatment resources, but the court is not, necessarily the body or the entity that is mandating or making suggestions about particular medications or other treatment modalities. So I think it sounded like from a lot of the stakeholders we talked to, that was something that participants were really interested in. The idea that I'm going to have access to these sort of treatment options, such as MAT or other treatments. But the court isn't necessarily, the one actually administering treatment. And so I think, but there's still a level of accountability there for engaging with treatment as well. So I think that was something that came out as like a really big positive of the drug court models and a lot of the programs that we talked to.
Thank you. The next question is, what are some strategies to help with transportation in very rural areas with no public transportation?
Yeah, and transportation, I would say across the board. So rural areas definitely noted. There is, often no public transportation options. Even for some of the more metro areas, their transportation was still noted as being, having limitations. So I think there have been some innovative solutions. One region is mentioned partnering with a local taxi service to coordinate rides for individuals. And that seemed to be effective. They also found that there were bikes I think the police department would have bikes that were just there. I think they had been confiscated. They had this access to bikes, and they were able to use the bikes from that and give them to participants as well. So this could kind of, for participants that were kind of within biking distance, they were able to provide this sort of resource for individuals. And really, yeah, I think transportation is one sort of consistent sort of barrier for individuals across the state. And I think it's one area where individuals continue to really struggle in identifying potential solutions for transportation barriers.
I would just like to add to that and kind of broadening it, that in rural areas where we did see there is like lack of access to these resources, but also how they have used like local community connections to kind of build on. So like Dr. Purdue gave the example of transportation, they have partnered with like a local taxi service. We also saw in a rural county where they were working closely with a departmental store where drug court participants were getting employed at. So yeah, a lot of these smaller rural places were also using their local community connections to kind of bridge that gap.
Thank you. I do have another question here. So, did participants give any suggestions on what the staff training should entail? Would it be more focused on program details, or would it also include general knowledge on substance use or harm reduction, or information to combat stigma, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think yeah, and I would say yes. So I think the need to kind of look at, and if we're talking about broader court system stakeholders, I think increasing awareness of, program details, also increasing awareness of, substance use. One court highly recommended additional sort of training and understanding of individual and factors that individuals may experience, and sort of broadly kind of looking at socioeconomic conditions as well, training related to that, and to substance use. So I think just across the board, working in this space, making sure that training is there, and the information to combat stigma as well. So I think that was reported across, within communities as well as within the court system more broadly, and stigma towards the program too. So I think there can be some stigma towards that individuals may hold, or perceptions that this program is just seen as being enabling individuals, or it's not holding individuals accountable, or they may see the program as not being intensive when this program does have requirements, and it is individuals must meet these requirements to proceed. So Lydia or Didi, any other thoughts that you had on training?
If not, I'm happy to move on to one last final question, Dr. Purdue, if we have time.
Maybe one if it's a potentially quick response.
Okay, I'll try real quick. So, is the involvement of peers making a difference in Ohio, especially with reducing disparities in participation rates?
Yeah, I think this was an area that participants noted. So having that lived experience on the court. So along with, looking at the demographics, it was noted having individuals that have had experience with substance use is really important and critical as part of getting that support within the program. So I don't know if programs are really tracking metrics. I think that could be an interesting area that we could further explore and in looking at the role of peer support. And I think that's a critical maybe sort of next step in sort of exploring this in another area that we can move forward with the research.
I'm going to move forward with the end here. Thank you to our presenters for sharing their work and insights. And thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate the time and engagement from everyone participating in this conversation. Just some really great questions as well. Before we close, just a quick reminder to keep an eye out for the other two events in the webinar series, where the team will continue to build on these topics and share additional insights for practice. Thank you again, and we hope you'll join us for those future sessions.